In the sorrow-stricken village of Bethany, where the stench of death clung thick around Lazarus' tomb, the Christ stood. Before he uttered the command that recalled the dead man from the void itself, he performed a prerequisite, a supreme act, recorded simply yet containing an entire truth. He prayed. This was not a routine, heartfelt petition, nor was it a theatrical staging for the onlookers. It was a moment that tilted the celestial axis, an internal transposition, a fundamental restructuring of consciousness that had to occur prior to the alteration of the external world. It was the most sacred intersection, where the boundary between heaven and earth vanished. Yet, this deep practice, this inner sanctuary secret, this precise mental operation that converted consciousness and energy, leading directly to the great miracle, is the very thing that has been agonizingly lost in the current of modern belief. It was not hidden by conspiracy, but forgotten through the crude simplification of doctrine, through an inherent reluctance to delve into the technique. The technique of manifesting the miracle, the foundational spiritual scaffolding that separates mere rhetoric from the descent of revelation, has been expunged from religious teaching, replaced instead by hollow formulas. If your conscience has ever borne the burden that your prayers are merely howls vibrating into an empty cosmos, as if you are conversing with a bottomless void, a soundless dimension devoid of a responder, you are not alone. Millions of adherents stand upon that lonely precipice, feeling that the divine bridge has collapsed. This is the naked truth. We were taught that prayer is nothing more than conversing with God, an act of petition, of pleading, a hopeful and anxious negotiation. We are expected to beg for His consideration, to hope He will reply, if it is His divine will, if the cosmic timing allows, and most tragically, if the faith of the mortal supplicant is strong enough to merit review and approval. We have been relegated to the role of the spiritual beggar, perpetually awaiting favor from a capricious Almighty. And the tragedy reaches its zenith when the dreadful silence descends, when the miracle fails to manifest, when the material request or the plea for healing is not granted. At that point, instead of questioning the effectiveness of the method, we are offered cold rationalizations, like shields deployed to protect the impotence of the doctrinal system. We are condemned. That is because God said no, or your faith was not potent enough to enact the shift, or the ultimate crushing defense. His plan lies beyond the shallow common understanding of humanity. This is spiritual indictment, the moment we surrender to failure and turn away from the potential for the miraculous, simply because we have forgotten the true art of prayer, the inner operation that once elevated the teacher from Nazareth to the stature of the Creator, permitting him to command death to relinquish its captive. That loss is not a lack of belief, but a lack of method, the key that was dropped just before the threshold of heaven. Yet, there exists a profound truth, a sacred code almost forgotten by the multitudes, buried beneath the dust of hollow ritual. This is the staggering chasm between the desperate supplications of mankind and the supreme posture of the Christ. Many mistakenly believe that prayer is the act of desperate kneeling, a pitiful bargain struck in exchange for divine intervention. They are convinced that tears and promises must be leveraged to persuade a superhuman power to alter the present reality. But the historical truth, illuminated by the light of the gospel, reveals an altogether different operation. That is not how Jesus prayed. When He, the sovereign of life, stood silently before the cold stone of Lazarus' tomb, a man dead 4 days and already yielding to corruption, He did not enter into humanity's drama of pleading and despair. He did not fall to His knees, nor did He grovel, supplicate, or bargain for the Father to please raise Lazarus. Instead, John chapter 11 records an event that transcends the ordinary understanding of the Spirit. The Christ did not look downward in entreaty. He lifted His eyes toward heaven in a posture of authority and absolute certainty. And then, amidst the scene of death and hopelessness, He spoke words that echoed forth from the realm of the finished. Father, I thank You that You have heard me. Pause and ponder this operation. This is the very nexus of absolute power. Note the tense employed, the past perfect tense. He gave thanks for a condition yet unmanifested in the physical world. A dead man, still bound in grave clothes and sunk in eternal sleep. He did not ask for what will be done, but offered gratitude for what has already been accomplished. Jesus did not look upon the physical evidence, the sealed tomb, the decaying corpse, but gazed directly upon the completed divine reality. This thanksgiving was a cosmic declaration, an affirmation that the Father's will had been perfected completely within the spiritual dimension, even before its display in the tangible world. This is not the vague hope of men, but the absolute assurance of divine power. He stepped into the future perfect of faith. He gave thanks for the miracle before it occurred, as if the wonder was already an undeniable truth, a decree eternally sealed in the heavens. This is the supreme mystery of authoritative prayer, to see the unseen, and to give thanks for what already is. This is neither a desperate plea nor an act of petitionary begging. This is an altogether different reality. It is a state, a profound internal adjustment, a deep divine resonance established before the power is released. If we turn back the pages of the ancient Gospels, we discover a sacred and consistent template, repeated before every miracle, preceding every intervention that surpassed the limitations of the material world. It was not the moment when the Master humbled himself to beg the Father for strength. It was the moment he established primal communion, aligning his being with the infinite source, allowing the river of power to flow forth naturally and irresistibly. The miracle of seeing and silence, the paralytic. When the Master healed the paralytic man at Capernaum, Mark chapter 2 records that he first saw their faith, and only then did he speak the word. But between the moment of seeing and the moment of speaking, there existed a great pause. A transcendent instant the gospel does not name. Between the deep seeing of the soul and the declaration of the healing, a cosmic event transpired in the spiritual realm of the Master. It was a translation. It was the instant when the sword of will was drawn from the sheath of humanity, prepared for a touch of destiny. He did not simply decide to heal, he became the healing in that very instant. Power was concentrated, not through supplication, but through the establishment of fundamental reality. 2. The connection to heaven, the feeding of the 5,000. When the Master fed 5,000 people in the desolate wilderness with only 5 loaves and 2 fish, he did not immediately break the bread and distribute it. First, he looked up to heaven. That was not the gaze of a supplicant in need. It was the gaze of the Master Conductor achieving resonance. It was the posture of one connecting the individual engine of energy to the universal source gate. That upward glance was the action of a conduit being positioned, an instrument being tuned to the exact frequency of boundless love. He did not need to petition for more resources. He simply needed to become the perfect conduit for a resource that was already abundant. Only when this perfect harmony was struck could the flow of blessing multiply the finite material into unimaginable abundance. 3. The solitude of preparation, walking on water. Before performing the impossible, before treading upon the furious and unstable surges of the deep ocean, Matthew chapter 14 recounts that the Master went up to the mountain alone to pray. It was the ultimate solitude, the retreat into the silent temple. That ascent was not merely to escape the multitude. It was a journey of self-hypnosis designed to transcend every tether of gravity and physics. This prayer was transcendental meditation. It was the consolidation of the will to the point of absolute purity, the dismantling of the wall between the mortal and the divine, between the dust and the promise. When he descended, he was no longer governed by the laws of the world. He was the embodiment of the new law. IV, the irresistible flow, the woman with the issue of blood. And finally, the most potent event demonstrating this eternal state is the story of the woman with the issue of blood. The woman neither asked permission nor petitioned publicly. She simply touched the hem of his garment, and instantly he felt the living power flow out of him. He made no decision to heal her. He did not need to think or command. He existed in a perpetual state of high frequency, where power was not a thing to be switched on or off by will, but a continuous current. His being was a divinely charged vessel. The action of faith opened a gateway, and the dissolving strength rushed forth instantly, like water seeking its own level. That strength was not merely an ability used, it was the formed essence of his very being, ever ready to do the work of the Father. This is the great lesson. The miracle is produced not by the request for a gift, but by living in the state of pure power, a silent preparation, an endless harmonization. Here operates an eternal and immutable sequence, a divine law etched into the soul of every pioneer and sage. This is the cycle of transformation, where power never issues forth from the clamor of the marketplace, but must always be forged within the furnace of silence. It commences with the withdrawal, a decisive severance from the profane echo of the masses, a purposeful retreat from the stage where the vain ego seeks applause. Following this is the wilderness of solitude, the absolute space where no voice remains save the voice within. It is here that the interior shift is initiated, a radical restructuring where the old shell is discarded and all falsehood is purified. And only having crossed the threshold of that transmutation does the Genesis power erupt, brilliant and unshakable, like the victorious dawn piercing the night. But this is the abyss no one dares to gaze upon, the question buried beneath the weight of history and indifference. If the Supreme Master gave directives as clear and distinct as a craftsman's blueprint regarding the exact method of enacting prayer, why does modern theology treat it as an ambiguous mystery, a miracle that occurs only by accident, rather than a programmed method, a spiritual technology that anyone can employ? It was in the 6th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew that the Messiah delivered a profound teaching, a spiritual cipher that the majority of mankind has eternally misread throughout their lives, an inherent misunderstanding that has turned the architectural design into mere reckless sketching. He spoke not with gentle counsel, but with an absolute mandate of initiation, a precise instruction for action. When thou prayest, enter into thy closet, and when thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father, which is in secret. You have heard that explanation repeated ad nauseum, reduced merely to a counsel of etiquette and privacy. Find a quiet place. Do not boast. Perform the ritual where none may witness. This is the shallowest interpretation, true only on the surface layer of social behavior. Yet it represents a grievous omission, a theft of the entire core meaning the Master intended to transmit. The search for a physical empty room is merely a symbolic act. The true implication of this command is the penetration of the interior chamber, a state of consciousness and the deepest inner space. The shutting of the door is not the closing of wood, but the closing of every sense to the clamoring demands of the exterior world, a closing of memory, anxieties, and the ego's desire for display. This is not advice on social morality. This is the manual for the technique of transcendent concentration, the key to entering the realm of secret, where God does not reside in the public and the ostentatious, but dwells in absolute silence at the hidden center of the human soul. Prayer is a method, not a mystery to be awaited, and the closet is the laboratory of the great transformation. In the ancient Greek tongue used by the Master, the very word designated for this room or closet is taimon. This is no mere ambiguous term. It carries a profound metaphysical weight. Taimon never signifies a simple sleeping chamber for rest, nor is it an unthinking cupboard for storage. Taimon denotes an inner sanctum, a hallowed treasury, the deepest hidden citadel within the very structure of creation. Jesus did not offer us geographical advice concerning external placement or arrangement. He was delivering a map leading to the internal dimension, a mystic blueprint for the soul. He commends us, when thou prayest, venture deep within. Dive into that part of thee which exists beyond the hurried currents of thought, beyond the ephemeral ego and fleeting identity, beyond all the chaotic clamor of finite consciousness. Enter the mysterious interior of the self. And behold, this is the pivotal command, the decisive act of spiritual genesis. He declares, "Shut the door." This is not an effort to merely concentrate, nor is it a minimal attempt to minimize distraction. It is a resolute action. Seal the door. Lock tight the gates of the senses and the external awareness. This action is a radical severance from the profane outer world. Lock the current of the five senses, still the ceaseless whisper of the intellect, and cast aside that version of thyself which is steeped in fear, ambition, and worldly craving. For the divine source, the Father, does not exist somewhere out there, listening from a distant and indeterminate space. He is not a being enthroned high upon the clouds. The Father resides in the secret. He is present right within the interior Timon, the place which the majority of humanity can never reach, for they do not even know that it exists. It is the truth concealed at the very heart of being. This is the timeless space, the chamber carved out of eternal silence, where all forms of separation vanish. And the Master journeyed into this space. Jesus entered this secret chamber every single time, before infinite power moved and circulated through him. This is neither theological speculation nor abstract theory. This is an immutable divine law, an operating paradigm of the cosmos. Every extraordinary healing, every manifest miracle, every moment when the invisible becomes visible, adheres to this unchangeable sequence: shutting the door, stilling the mind, going within, accessing the source. Manifestation power flows into the world. Only in the sealed stillness of the Timon interior, when the door of the daily self has been closed, can truth reveal itself, and unbounded life flow without limitation. This is the sole place to encounter the Absolute, and from thence to bring heaven back to the earth. The turn must precede the tempest. First, the centering of the heart, the attainment of absolute stillness, the alignment of the soul's frequencies. Only then, the eruption of boundless divine power. This is the eternal command, the foundational architecture upon which all supernatural strength is built. Yet herein lies the tragic flaw, the devastating chasm that has shaken every foundation of faith. Man has never been truly taught the method, the precise way to step across the threshold of that inner chamber. They instruct him only to close his eyes and instantly commence a tumultuous monologue. He is encouraged to utilize the mere intellect, to contemplate God, to imagine the divine seated remotely upon a high throne, leaning an ear toward the endless stream of fragmented petitions and incessant lamentations. The essential truth remains forgotten. The application of ratiocination to speculate upon the divine is not but a futile dance upon the precarious edge of the mind, a mere exercise in intellectual gymnastics. This is utterly distinct from, indeed antithetical, to the act of stepping into the profound dominion where the absolute presence resides, a presence requiring no language, a total attunement that transcends all form and thought. Engrave this upon your soul. This disastrous confusion between contemplation and incarnation, between thought and entering, is the root cause for why the miracle has ceased, why the wellspring of sacred power has run dry across the centuries. It is not that God ceased to hear the supplication of mankind. Rather, it is the method, the precise and holy practice of accessing that inner chamber, sealing the door, and abiding there in consecrated silence that was tragically misplaced, cruelly forgotten by the passage of time. This dereliction was not accidental. It occurred when the faith transitioned from small, contemplative communities, wherein each soul fought its own battle to map the inner terrain, into a vast religion of empire, defined by administrative governance and mass legislation. You cannot systematize stillness. Silence itself is antithetical to standardization. You cannot standardize profound inner development through a rapid administrative process printed upon parchment. The opening of the soul demands time, individual commitment, and a measureless devotion. When the sacred becomes an instrument of the state, it is compelled to become an institution capable of mass production. One cannot train masses of clergy or priests to guide the multitudes into a mystical space which they themselves have never truly entered. Consequently, the shepherds became mere keepers of books, readers of texts, administrators of rituals, but no longer genuine spiritual navigators. They could only teach that which could be measured and interpreted externally. Thus, the profound precepts concerning the inner path remained preserved, inviolate, within the Holy Writ. Yet the practice, the essential how, the mechanism for achieving that critical alignment, gradually faded from common instruction. What endured was a sequence of rites one could perform publicly, prayers one could memorize mechanically, and patterns one could follow as a social habit, without ever enduring the agony and the glory of cultivating the inner capacity described by the Christ. It was a tragic exchange. The document endures, the dogma is worshipped, but the method has been forever forgotten. The soul remains stranded between the spoken word and the sealed door of the inner chamber. Allow me now to draw back the veil of ages, to reveal a supreme truth understood by the Christ, a profound realization that has been utterly cast out from the modern teachings of the Church. The great error: prayer is not persuasion. Prayer is not the effort to coerce the Creator. It is not prolonged supplication, nor a wearisome negotiation aimed at altering the will of the divine. It is not standing before the throne of the cosmos listing personal demands in hopes of softening the heart of a seemingly reluctant providence. That, indeed, is the greatest misconception of this age. Those who teach that prayer is merely begging have not yet touched the threshold of the sacred principle. They still operate within the condition of separation, where man is the starved petitioner and God is the demanding sovereign who must be appeased. The cornerstone of change, the state of coherence. Hear this word carefully, for this is the watershed, the secret that changes the entire trajectory of your spiritual journey. Prayer, as practiced and manifested by Jesus, is not the act of enticing the Most High. It is the stepping into a state of perfect resonance. It is an internal translation, a deep adjustment of frequency, where the current of your consciousness and the Supreme Source no longer operate as two separate, distant entities. This is the unity. This is the greatest spiritual science that has been forgotten. The merging of wills, no conflict, no distance. When you achieve this coherence, your will and the will of the Father, the divine intent, are no longer realms of conflict or ceaseless bargaining. They become one flow. They coalesce. They eliminate the distance between the desire of the mortal self and the arrangement of the universe. You cease to struggle for what you want, because what you want has become utterly identical to what the universe wills for you. This is the dissolution of the small ego in order to merge into the greater self. In this unified state, all barriers dissolve. There is no void separating you from the source. There is no desperate remoteness. There is no shadow of division or fragmentation. There is only a perfect union. A sacred merging where the individual vanishes into the eternal, where your actions become the actions of the Source, and your prayer is no longer a petition, but the echoing affirmation that I and the Father are one. That is prayer according to the principle of the Christ. That is true power. And it is from that profound chamber, from that seat of absolute authority, that when man speaks, his voice is no longer the weak plea of a suppliant petitioning reality to shift. Nay, it is the majestic recognition that reality is already and eternally complete. He does not stand among the ranks of the hopeful, those who peer into the chasm of deficiency to place their request. Instead, he steps into the domain of manifestation, where the uttered word is not a seed sown and waiting for germination, but the final edict proclaiming the harvest is done. This is why, at the tomb of Lazarus, amidst the stench of mortality and the weeping of the world, Christ did not pray for a miracle to happen. He did not speak in the future tense, nor the imperfect present. He spoke in the past tense of divine certitude, a past tense where all doubt is banished by the light of divine recognition. He gave thanks before the wonder appeared. This is not emotional self-deception. It is the unshakable bending of time and space. That act of gratitude is the evidence, the seal of the completion already ordained. He thanks the Father before the material veil descends, because, in the realm of cause, the act is already an irreversible truth, the superficial collapse of linear time. It is from the interior of that supreme citadel, where the human consciousness is made one with the infinite will of the Creator, that the fractured segmentation of present, past, and future is crushed and collapses. In the radiant light of complete alignment, the future ceases to be a distant land to be attained, and the present is no longer a harrowing struggle. Both merge into the pinnacle moment, where all things stand declared, "It is finished." What our fleshy eyes observe may not yet have caught up to the velocity of this divine truth. What we call reality is merely the sluggish echo of a declaration already issued from the invisible. The physical phenomenon is the delayed reflection of a fact etched into the eternal library. While the visible world still grapples with the linear logic of time, waiting, hoping, and counting the days, in the invisible sphere, the realm of cause and divine conception, all has been sealed, signed, and affirmed. Speaking from accord, not lack. Therefore, O speaker of the word, you must not speak from the position of deficiency, where longing still groans for satisfaction. You do not speak from desire, for desire implies that the thing does not yet exist. You do not speak from hope, for hope, though noble, is still an admission that the result hangs in the balance. And you absolutely do not speak from the anxiety of petition, for anxiety is evidence of fragmented faith, fearing the divine will might deny. No. Instead, you utter your word from absolute accord, from complete harmony. You speak from the place where the will of the Father and your own will are undivided by any gap, any resistance, or any shred of doubt. It is the voice of a king declaring the law of his kingdom, a word spoken not to change external reality, but to compel external reality to bow and submit before the truth proclaimed from the interior. It is completion speaking. It is the will of heaven realized. Hear this, O ye people. Hearken now to the profound revelation, the majestic declaration of the Christ himself, a truth etched by him into the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 10. This is not merely utterance, it is the echo of the absolute, an eternal statute of dominion. The mysterious declaration, he declared, "The words that I speak unto you, I speak not of myself, but the Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works." This is the zenith of humility, the most profound self-abasement ever proclaimed. He claimed no glory for himself. He asserted no personal sovereignty. He funneled no energy into the mortal human ego. Instead, he certified this truth. I am not the doer of this thing. It is the Father operating through me. Ponder deeply the precise terminology he employed. He did not say the Father acts for him or acts upon him. He utilized the word through, the sacred conduit. Jesus became the pure channel, the spotless vessel, the very doorway of convergence, the place where heaven and earth meet. He was the central point where mortal will dissolved and divine will poured forth. The miracle did not reside in his unique personality, but in the completeness of his renunciation of that personality. To achieve this vessel state, he was required to enter the inner chamber and close the door against every sound, every temptation, every desire, everything that was not God. He eliminated the interference to become a pure, unblemished reflection. If you dare attempt to speak forth from the mortal I, from the satisfied ego, from the divided mind, from the chaos of separated consciousness, nothing shall transpire. All effort shall be in vain. Why? Because you are not yet aligned. You stand still upon the threshold, operating from lack and longing, from fear and petition. Remember this. The external world never answers division. The world responds only to the source, the path of silence. You can only access the source when you travel where the Christ traveled, inward, closing the door, diving deep into the stillness that existed before thought was conceived. It is the state before identification, before the clamor of personal desire could lift its voice. This is the great mystery he repeated throughout his ministry, the 40 days in the wilderness. Why did he endure 40 days of solitude before beginning his work? It was not a physical exercise in endurance. It was a radical realignment, eradicating every illusion of human identity, to remain only the one sent, the retreat into the mountains. Why did he ascend the mountaintop to pray before selecting the 12 disciples? He sought the ultimate authority before a fateful decision. He needed to hear the Father's echo clearly, silencing every human strategic calculation, acting only by divine intent. The continuous withdrawal. Why did he constantly seek out isolated places, secluded corners, even as the crowds pressed upon him, desperate for his attention and his miracles? This was not the recharging of a weary body. This was not rest after strenuous journeys. This was incessant return. He went back into the inner chamber, closed the door, and recalled his true self, a self that lies beyond the confines of human personality. And every time he did so, he returned with a renewed dominion surging forth, an endless current of miracles activated, not by him, but through him, because he accepted the role of the immaculate bridge between heaven and earth. O humankind, learn the lesson of the inner chamber, for the key to all power rests not in external effort, but in complete internal unity. Close the door and return to the source. Hear this, ye who thirst for the root, and seek the path beyond the veil of dust. I bestow upon you now not the complete method, for the deep inner sanctuary reveals its portals only to those souls committed to reverence and humility, lingering long at the threshold, listening for the call of the voiceless. But I grant unto thee the starting point, the diamond foundation, the singular prerequisite that makes every remaining journey possible. If thou truly wisheth to set foot upon the highway where the Master Jesus trod, thou must forthwith, and without hesitation, put an end to the old mental habits that bind thee. Thou must sever the conversation held with the Most High within thy own mind. Cease assigning form and feature to the formless one. Refrain from petitioning, pleading, or craving any external response. Never imagine him as an entity standing yonder, hearing thy lamentation from some infinite remove. These are but the mists of the mind, phantoms conjured from need. All such actions are but noise. They are the chains of gold thou fasteneth upon thy own neck, keeping thee bound in the outer court. In lieu of these unprofitable motions, execute this divine mandate. Seek out a sanctuary where silence is honored, where no worldly clamor is permitted to trespass. This is the right of self-containment. Thou art building the temple for thyself. Be seated. Establish thy body as an ancient stone, unwavering. Relax the burden of the muscle, free the bone from its duty of support, permitting them to melt into immobility. Close the physical eyes. And instead of launching into a prayer, instead of releasing a flood of chaotic verbiage, instead of striving to focus thy will upon any object, perform the simplest, most fundamental action. Breathe, not with special technique, nor with complicated esoteric discipline. Only the present breath, the current stream of thy very life. Be fully conscious of this marvelous movement. Feel the air entering the lung, a pure reception. Feel the air exiting the vessel, an absolute surrender. And with every exhalation, intentionally, purposefully, cast off one layer of static from thy perception. Envision thy breath as a purifying wind, sweeping away all that doth not belong to the present moment. Let the thoughts of duties yet to be fulfilled dissolve. Let the sharp dialogue thou engaged in before subside. Let the version of thee worried about the morrow or reliving the sorrow of yesterday recede. This is the radical liberation. The breath received is the acceptance of life. The breath expelled is the refusal of the past and the future. When thou persevereth in this ritual of breathing and releasing, like a persistent diver descending to the ocean floor, thou shalt begin to sense and trace the space that lieth behind the roaring thoughts. That is the land of stillness. That is the eternal essence which ever resideth deep beneath the tempest of the mind, beneath the surging waves of worry and desire. It is the primeval silence lying under all sound. In that stillness, thou shalt not need to seek God, for in that place thou and God are one. This is the golden threshold, O thirsting one. So long as thou drawest breath, this gate ever awaiteth thee. Engage now. Mark well. This event is so profound and subtle that it borders upon the imperceptible. It shall not arrive as the clap of thunder rending the sky, nor as the manifest summons from the unseen realm. Thou shalt hear no clear voice echoing unto thine ear. Thou shalt witness no blinding phantom, no dramatic upheaval of the spirit, nor any spectacular divine occurrence. This encounter bears no mark of ostentation or display. Yet, if thou art steadfast in thy presence there, if thou possesseth the courage to withstand the powerful impulse of the ego, the urge to commence speaking, for we are ever fearful of the void, the urge to begin questioning in tones of doubt, or the urge to set about performing the rote and familiar rituals of prayer which were taught thee, then shall a profound matter begin to germinate. Thou shalt begin to sense a thing, a presence. This presence is not an entity alien to thee, nor a deity standing without to judge or to bestow. It is not separate from thy very self, nor an independent being reigning in some distant space. Rather, it is closer than the incoming and outgoing breath that moveth within thy breast, closer than the fundamental, immutable cadence of thine own heart. It is the indwelling source, obscured by layer upon layer of concept and clamor. This is the threshold of the inner sanctuary. And when thou hast reached this verge, be exceeding careful, rush not forth hastily. Seek not to use the will to force an event according to thine own desire. Never commence straightway to list the tally of things that must be fixed, nor question the Most High concerning thy material needs or personal sorrows. Turn not this sacred moment into a trade or a bargain. The sole task incumbent upon thee is this: simply be there. Hold fast to that state of mind. Even if thy whole consciousness doth cry out, saying, nothing is happening. Even if the logical intellect seeks to drag thee back into the vortex of thought, into craving, into the familiar pattern of petitioning God for all that thou lackest, abide. For the door to the deep spiritual reality never opens by force or by the urging of the will. It opens only through thorough recognition and profound attunement. And that recognition demands time. Thou mayest sit for 5 minutes and feel as though thou art wasting every useless second. Thou mayest tarry 10 minutes and doubt that thou art making error, believing this ritual requires some secret formula. Yet thou art not mistaken. Thou art practicing the highest art of the spiritual life, the art of learning serenity and stillness. Thou art learning to close the door that shuts out the relentless stream of the outer world and the ego's tumult. Thou art learning to cease speaking long enough to truly listen. Thou art learning to discern clearly what it means to no longer be identified with the habitual voice of fear in the head. No longer to be the I that ever feels deficient and requires something to be mended, to be supplied, or to be urgently altered. Thou art learning to rest completely within an eternal presence, a source that has always awaited thy attention and recognition. This is absolute repose within the heart of wholeness, and this is the indispensable foundation. Without this bedrock, every other spiritual endeavor becomes void. Thou mayest study and master every complex prayer technique in the world. Thou mayest memorize every word of the Scriptures, fast unto hardship, worship with zeal, and serve thy fellow man with diligence. But if thou never learnest how to enter the Holy of Holies, if thou never learnest to shut the door upon restlessness and attain absolute stillness, thou shalt forever remain one who prays from the outside. And from that outer court, the noisy forecourt of the mind where craving and fear still hold dominion, in that place there is no power. True power begins only with the recognition within, where the inner sanctum is unveiled. Yet here is where the true nature of the transition is laid bare, once the fundamental foundation has been established, and the soul has learned to recognize the majestic presence within the inner room. Following the stillness, the arrangement, the entering into the secret place and the closing of the door, a second seismic movement was undertaken by Christ. It was not a petition, not a heartfelt plea, but a radical inversion of consciousness, transforming mere alignment into supreme authority. This is precisely the difference between praying with the Father and acting as the Father. When Jesus declared, "I and the Father are one," he was not merely issuing a theological statement about his unique divine nature. He was precisely describing the state of consciousness. He entered before every miracle. It is the place where the boundary between the self and the source dissolves completely, where the will of I and the will of He are no longer two separate entities to be negotiated, but a single stream, a single current, a unified operation of absolute oneness, the realization of authority. From that place of confluence, he did not petition for miracles. He recognized them. He perceived the truth already manifest in the unseen realm and spoke it forth into the visible realm. That is why he could command the paralytic, "Rise and walk," with a tone of ultimate decree, utterly void of doubt. That is why he could order the storm to be silent, as though he were speaking to his own breath. That is why he could call Lazarus forth from the tomb, shattering the final law of matter. He did not hope God would act. He acted from the place where he and the divine source were already one. This is the extraordinary thing that happens when you learn to abide consistently in the inner chamber. When you close the door and rest in that presence long enough, consistently enough, a tectonic shift begins. You cease experiencing yourself as a separate entity, begging for help from the outside. Instead, you begin to experience yourself as the very locus through which the divine will is made manifest. Not because you are special or have achieved some spiritual elevation, but simply because you have learned to stop getting in the way. It is the separate self, the demanding, fearing, craving ego, which is the greatest impediment to the flow of power. When you step into the inner room and close the door, you temporarily set aside the fearful version of yourself. You are stepping out of the way so that what has always been present can move through you unimpeded. The door to the present heaven. Jesus called this state the kingdom of heaven. Not a place you go to after death, but a state of consciousness you enter while living. And he declared that it resides within you, deep in that secret room. This, however, must be stated clearly. This is not an instantaneous flash-in-the-pan process. You will not try this once tonight and wake up tomorrow performing miracles. The door to the inner chamber opens slowly, deliberately, like a flower unfolding in the morning dew. It requires practice, infinite patience, and a willingness to sit in the seeming emptiness, while your nervous system slowly learns to recognize a universal frequency it has not known. But it will surely open, and when that door begins to reveal itself, prayer ceases to be something you do for God to hear and becomes something you enact from God. Your words carry a different weight. Your intention aligns with a greater reality and intelligence, and the universe begins to respond in an entirely new way because you are no longer operating from separation. You are operating from source. This is the truth the mystics knew, the practice the Desert Fathers undertook, and the path the contemplatives had pursued in monasteries and retreats for 2,000 years, while much of the institutional church has forgotten how to teach it. But it was never meant to be locked away within cloister walls. It is for anyone willing to learn, anyone willing to stop talking long enough to listen, anyone willing to step into the inner room and discover the treasure that has awaited them there all along, the invitation to silence. Therefore, this is what I implore you to do. Do not merely watch this discourse and move on. Truly attempt this tonight, tomorrow morning, whenever you have 10 undisturbed minutes. Sit down, close your eyes, breathe deeply, release the noise and the agitation. Feel the stillness behind every thought, and when you find it, when you touch that, presence, even for a moment. Abide there. Do not ask for anything. Do not attempt to create anything. Just be in that space. Learn the feel of it. Train yourself to recognize it. Because once you know how to find the inner room, once you have closed that door even once, you will always be able to return. And the more you return, the more natural it becomes. Until one day, you realize you are no longer a visitor. You reside there. That is when prayer ceases to be a practice and becomes your permanent state of being. That is when you truly understand what Jesus meant when he proclaimed, "The kingdom of heaven is at hand," not coming someday, not elsewhere, but right here, right now, within you. If this resonates with you, if something inside you recognizes the truth we have uncovered, do one thing. Share this with someone who is searching for a deeper way to pray. For the more people who discover the inner room, the more who learn to close the door and merge with the source, the more profoundly this world is transformed. Go seek the stillness and discover the treasure awaiting you in that great silence.